you, Jack. Can I go back, Ms. Wheeler, to what you were saying about trucks turning up at Dover Calais not having the correct documentation? And you said at least 20% of the trucks turning up, according to the HMRC estimate, when you were there, would be in that position. Were you referring to UK trucks arriving at Dover to go into the EU, or EU trucks arriving at Calais to come into the UK?
Well, it's a good question, because obviously the only estimate that we were able to make on readiness of organisations was about UK businesses, and UK businesses generally will be exporting their goods rather than on the import side. But we had no real way of estimating how many organisations would be ready for French customs, and it would obviously be the readiness for French customs that would cause the problems. Yeah. So we were using our own figures of UK businesses as a proxy for what we anticipated would be the case for French businesses. And that may have been wrong. I know the French took a slightly more optimistic view of the numbers of businesses that would be ready. They like us, believed that the lack of readiness by organisations was the biggest hurdle to free flow across Calais and Dover. I think I can't remember what number they thought, but they were slightly more optimistic about their numbers, but they hadn't done the detailed modelling and analysis that we'd done on our numbers. So I wasn't sure I had complete confidence in their modelling.
That's very helpful, though. So, estimated at least 20% of the trucks turning up at Dover won't have the correct documentation. Is that because there won't be an EORI number, or is it other things that are...
So I should emphasise, of course, that this was our assessment and assumptions as of June. Yeah. And one of the key things that caused that was because a very large number of businesses were still listening to what was being talked about and saying, no deal is never going to happen, so why should I bother? I don't need to invest this resource and effort into getting my business ready for a no deal because, government is telling us it's never going to happen. We always thought, even then, that if there was a change in Prime Minister and a change of the narrative about no deal, that would have a very significant impact on the number of businesses who suddenly said, no deal might happen, I'd better prepare. So those numbers, I think, almost certainly are shifting, and the numbers that I was referring to may have shifted significantly. However, the other factor, I think, is that big businesses have capability and resource to be able to prepare for customs. Small businesses and SMEs don't. They're normally busy trying to keep their business going and can't really take time out and money out to hire customs agents that might never be used. A large number of those trucks will be associated with small businesses, and I would expect, and I think we all expected, that the small businesses might still leave it to the wire before they started to prepare. And if they left it to the wire, then they would not have enough time. You can't get these things done within a day. So that would be a problem.
So is it essentially about getting an EORI number, or is it other things?
Yes, so the EORI number is literally the prerequisite. If you can't do a customs declaration unless you've registered with HMRC, and the process is they give you an EORI number. Yeah. But that is a 2-minute job. The difficult job is carrying out a customs declaration, for which typically businesses find that so complex that they hire a specialist customs agent to be able to help them through that complicated process, because there are thousands of commodity codes for all the different products, depending not only on what they are but where they come from, and how they are sourced. You have to apply rules of origin. It is a complex process, so not something that Joe Bloggs will normally be able to do.
Just one more question, if I may, then I'll ask Mr. Hookham to comment. But if a truck turns up at Dover without the correct documentation, what would you expect to happen? I mean, one possibility, surely, is that the truck will be sent back. Sorry, you haven't got it, you've got to go. Or do you envisage it'll sit there for hours or maybe days while some process is proceeded? What will actually happen in practice?
What would happen in practice is, so the French have their computerised systems ready so that they would expect, if you have got a customs declaration, you will be able to scan that and you'll go into a green lane and then they will let you through.
Will this happen in Dover or in Calais?
It will happen as part of the ferry crossing process. So it is normally, as you board the ferry or as you board the Eurotunnel, then that scanning process would happen on the carrier or as part of boarding the carrier, and that would enable trucks to be that have got the correct documentation to be waved through into a green lane, and that would enable them to go into France. The truck that doesn't have the correct documentation, it will be waved into a red lane, and the red lane will be where the French will then stop the truck, look to see what documentation that they've got. Now, they estimated that they might hold those trucks at what they told us, but informally, they told us that they might hold those trucks for between 2 and 8 hours, and they would, that almost certainly wouldn't be enough for that truck to be able to get the correct documentation, but it might be enough time for them to collect enough detail from the truck driver about the goods to enable them to then subsequently follow up and get the right customs documentation. But so they weren't sure, I don't think, exactly how long they would be holding those trucks and what they would do with them, and whether they would let them go before they've got customs documentation or not. Those were things they were working through at the time.
That's very helpful. So these trucks will be held in Calais for a period. Do we know what the capacity is in Calais for holding trucks?
We understood there was something like 300 spaces that were allocated in Calais for holding trucks that were not ready.
But you've told us that at least 20% of the trucks will be in this position, so the 300 spaces will pretty quickly fill up.
That was precisely why we estimated that there would very quickly end up being queues, because they would fill up those spaces, which would be full potentially for at least 8 hours, which would mean for the course of that day, effectively, no more trucks could cross and be held up unless they are ready with the correct documentation.
So the queues would be in Dover, would they?
The queues would be in Dover because they wouldn't be able to cross into France, yes.
You can't send anyone else, so the queues would be here. Okay, thank you. Mr. Hookham.
I was just going to hopefully illuminate your question a little bit, because, of course, if the truck is carrying a consignment from one seller to one buyer, then it's relatively a straightforward process, a full container load, a full vehicle load. A huge proportion of the goods going across is on groupage, so multiple consignments in one vehicle, and of course the vehicle could be detained even though only one or two handful of the actual consignments in the back of the vehicle don't have the right paperwork. So we're very, very dependent in those kinds of loads on everything being right first time. And the chances of that not happening are then multiplied probably by an order of magnitude when you look at parcels and mail traffic, where you could have thousands of consignments possibly needing each one needing an individual declaration. Right. So it could be very, very dependent on just one or two poor declarations or poorly informed declarations. Could I also just say, in addition to all the checks about the loads, there is a whole range of new requirements coming in for the vehicle and the driver. So there will be new paperwork and documentation giving effectively the truck the permission to travel on the roads of the EU. The driver will need driving permits and so on. Range of other items that are going to need to be complied with by the haulier as opposed to the consigner of the goods. And these could also be potential points of enforcement and potential delay if they're not fully complied with. So there's going to be a lot to get right first time.